Do you truly believe he can listen to you, elderly gentleman? The tone was piercing, infused with the sort of idle haughtiness that only adolescence can master completely. It sliced through the solemn quiet enveloping the well-kept grounds of Arlington National Cemetery. Harlan Brooks stayed composed. He continued kneeling, with one hand placed on the upper part of the plain white gravestone, his posture upright in spite of the 83 years he bore. The inscription etched into the stone was as known to him as his own identity. Patrick O'Brien, a title that once represented a lively chuckle, a communal flask of water, a frantic murmur in the shadows. Now it was merely a title on a rock. The youth, no more than 19, moved a couple of steps nearer. He raised his phone, although not clearly capturing footage, the display emitting a faint synthetic glow on his features. He sported a high-end sweatshirt and a grin that appeared fixed permanently. I mean, it's a kind act and everything, I suppose, but you're conversing with a stone, just to inform you. Harlan concluded his quiet dialogue with Patrick. He traced his aged digits over the inscribed date of passing, a date seared into his recollection with the intensity of blasts in the coldness of bereavement. Gradually, intentionally, he rose to his feet, his joints complaining with a sequence of muted snaps and cracks, a personal dialect of maturity and past wounds. He pivoted to confront the lad, his gaze a light, transparent blue that had witnessed forests and arid lands, military fields and medical facilities. They contained no fury, solely a serene, endless fatigue. "He cannot hear me," Harlan stated, his tone a deep, rough scratch. "I am aware of that. I am not speaking. I am hearing." The lad's grin wavered for a brief moment, substituted by a spark of bewilderment. He regained composure swiftly, intensifying his patronizing manner. "Hearing what?" The turf expanding. "Fellow, seriously, it's somewhat excessive, isn't it? You're sort of obstructing the view here. Folks are attempting to capture photos." He motioned loosely with his device toward the far-off Lincoln Memorial, as though the burial ground were simply an attractive backdrop for visitor images. Harlan's stare remained steady. He just remained there, a column of tranquility amid an increasing wave of rudeness. Other guests in the area started to observe. A household with small kids quieted their talk, throwing worried looks. A lady in a dark gown positioned a few lines distant halted in her personal instance of sorrow, her forehead creasing with worry. The atmosphere became dense with unvoiced criticism, but the lad appeared to thrive on it, his relaxed unkindness growing into a spectacle. "Observe this location," the youth went on, his volume rising. He nudged a tiny, impeccably trimmed clump of grass at the boundary of the burial site. "All these markers all arranged in rows. It's like, all right, we understand. You were military personnel. Significant achievement. My relative works in commerce and he journeys much further than you fellows ever did. You don't observe us erecting 1,000 monuments for him." Harlan Brooks's hand, which had been dangling freely at his side, moved to the chest compartment of his plain woolen coat. His fingers grazed a compact, firm item inside. He did not remove it. It was merely a routine, a desire to contact a fragment of his history, a physical connection to the individual interred under his feet. "This isn't concerning monuments," Harlan remarked, his tone still soft. However, it appeared to penetrate the lad's babble. "This is concerning commitments." "Commitments?" The youth emitted a scornful chuckle. "What commitments?" "That you'd arrive to converse with his spirit annually. A bit eerie, don't you believe? You ought to be at residence viewing television or similar, not out here pretending to be a combat legend." He advanced another step nearer, encroaching on Harlan's private area. He reduced his volume to a secretive murmur, a vile imitation of closeness. "Allow me to speculate. You were a chef, a logistics assistant, handling documents while the genuine legends were out there performing the tasks." Each term was a minor, keen prod intended to incite, to break the elderly gentleman's poise. But Harlan stayed serene. It was a calmness he had acquired long before, in locations where abrupt actions could signify the distinction between survival and demise. He had confronted individuals with firearms and explosives, individuals whose gazes flared with a hostility much fiercer than this lad's relaxed contempt. The youth was a bother, a fly humming in the dignified atmosphere of a sanctuary. A modest gathering was now openly observing. Devices had appeared, and this occasion they were certainly documenting. The situation was too captivating. The resolute senior gentleman in his formal attire and the mocking, insolent adolescent, an ideal depiction of age-related clash. The lad detected the fresh focus and expanded with it. His viewers were increasing. He directed a digit at Harlan's coat. "What is that you're clutching in there? Your combat decorations? Let's view them. That you acquired them at a second-hand store. That you've got an entire tale fabricated about how you individually secured the victory in the conflict." He motioned theatrically at the gravestone. "Was he your closest companion? Did you cradle him in your embrace as he perished?" "I've watched all the films, grandfather. Your tales are outdated information." Harlan's digits gripped tighter around the item in his compartment. It was a Zippo igniter, its metallic covering smoothed by years of manipulation. The joint was slack, the spark mechanism dim, but it was his most valued item. The lad's terms, intended to ridicule, had accidentally hit a note of reality. The environment surrounding Harlan appeared to distort and diminish for a pulse. The groomed verdure of Arlington faded into the sludgy, stifling obscurity of a shelter in the Aha Valley. The courteous whispers of the assembly were supplanted by the steady beat of chopper rotors and the desperate cries of youthful men. Precipitation, dense and tepid, adhered his locks to his brow. He envisioned himself, a youth of 20, crouched over a chart with Patrick O'Brien. The sole illumination originated from the minor, persistent blaze of the Zippo, projecting swaying silhouettes on their strained, dirt-smeared countenances. Patrick had smiled, his dentition a burst of pale in the dimness. "Don't misplace that item, Harl," he'd expressed. "It's the sole functioning igniter in this entire cursed wilderness." It's fortunate. The recollection was so clear, so thorough that Harlan could nearly detect the metallic scent of the downpour in the moist soil. It endured only a moment, a rapid reverberation from an existence past before the current moment returned sharply into clarity. The lad was still speaking, his tone a grating hum. "Observe," he zoned out, likely forgot his location. "This is simply pitiful." Approximately 50 yards distant, near a sizable oak tree, the lady in the dark gown, Margaret Hayes, had witnessed sufficient. She was a former Army colonel present to visit her spouse's burial site. She identified the expression in Harlan's gaze, not as fragility, but as the deep, unyielding concentration of a warrior. She also identified the lad's conduct as an unacceptable violation of consecrated territory. Her initial impulse was to stride over and orally deconstruct the young individual with the complete strength of her authoritative tone. But she understood that would merely generate a larger commotion, one that would additionally dishonor the serene honor of the location in the elderly gentleman at its core. There was a superior method. She pivoted and proceeded away quickly, retrieving her device from her handbag. She possessed a distinct contact, one she hadn't utilized in years. A straight connection to the bureau of the regimental leader of the 3rd United States Infantry, the Old Guard, the division accountable for Arlington National Cemetery. A youthful expert responded, his tone sharp and expert. "Colonel Hayes's bureau, how may I assist you?" he stated, a remnant from her period in duty. "This is Colonel Margaret Hayes, retired," she declared, her tone subdued and pressing. "I am at Arlington Section 60. There is a non-military individual actively bothering an aged guest at a burial location. The guest is a former soldier. The non-military individual's conduct is intensifying, and he is creating a notable disruption." "I comprehend, madam," the expert answered. "We can send a protection team right away." "No," Margaret stated resolutely. "I don't believe you comprehend. You don't require protection. You need to dispatch a sentinel, and you need to do it immediately." There was a hesitation on the opposite side of the connection. A plea for a tomb guard sentinel to intercede in a communal disruption was extremely uncommon, nearly unprecedented. "A sentinel, madam. Hear me, young man." Margaret's tone adopted the undeniable sharpness of authority. "The individual being bothered is exhibiting a demeanor I have not observed in a considerable duration. There is a deep disrespect happening on holy territory. This demands more than a protection officer. It demands a declaration, Obtain the sergeant of the guard on the connection. Her persistence succeeded. An instant afterward, a more profound, more grave tone emerged. This is Sergeant Elias Grant, Sergeant of the Guard. What is the circumstance, Colonel? Margaret rapidly narrated the occurrence. The mocking lad, the resolute elderly gentleman, the expanding assembly. The youth is deriding his duty, Sergeant, directly here in Arlington. He's transforming this location into an entertainment. Can you portray the former soldier, madam? Sergeant Grant inquired, his manner entirely professional. Age at over 80, I'd estimate. Woolen coat, silver hair, but his stance, it's impeccable. He's positioned there like a sculpture. He's grasping something in his compartment, something he won't release. Does he have any observable emblems, madam? Any badges, any awards? Margaret narrowed her eyes, attempting to obtain a clearer view from her position. It's difficult to perceive. Hold on. Yes, on his collar. It's quite tiny, quite faded. A basic blue badge with a group of white stars. The connection became entirely quiet for 3 complete seconds. When Sergeant Grant spoke once more, all remnants of routine composure were absent. His tone was strained with a startling, nearly volatile urgency. Colonel, where did you indicate you were? Section 60. Near which site? Margaret provided him the positions, reciting the title on an adjacent gravestone. Comprehended, Colonel, Grant stated, his tone now filled with a nuance of reverence. Assistance is en route. Do not intervene. Simply monitor him. Keep Mr. Brooks secure. Brooks, Margaret inquired, how did you know his identity? But the connection was already terminated. Within the tomb guard accommodations beneath the Memorial Theater, Sergeant Grant forcefully placed the receiver down. He turned to a youthful sentinel who was carefully readying his attire for the subsequent guard change. Obtain the leader now. The youthful sentinel, familiar with the rhythmic, secluded tranquility of the accommodations, was surprised by the sergeant's fervor. Sergeant, did I hesitate? Expert. Obtain the leader on the line and retrieve every document we possess on Medal of Honor awardee Harlan Brooks. Proceed. The identity lingered in the atmosphere like a lightning strike. Harlan Brooks. It was an identity uttered only in subdued, respectful pitches in this location, an identity from the chronicles, a myth. The youthful sentinel's countenance became ashen. He didn't merely relocate, he rushed. The whole ambiance of the accommodations transitioned from silent order to tense electric strain. The sergeant of the guard was already seizing his own formal jacket, his actions keen and exact. They weren't dispatching a protection team, they were activating an honor escort. Back at the burial site, the arrogant youth had attained the peak of his conceit. He sensed the gazes of the assembly upon him, observed the devices directed in his path, and misinterpreted their astonishment for praise. He was the centerpiece of the performance. He resolved it was time for his magnificent conclusion. He scoffed theatrically. You know what? I'm finished with this. You're simply a deranged elderly gentleman. You likely don't even recognize the fellow in the soil. You just arrive here for notice. He then performed his ultimate inexcusable act of violation. He extended downward and with a snap of his digits displaced the solitary basic poppy Harlan had positioned at the foundation of the gravestone onto the turf. There, the youth declared with a victorious sneer, discarding waste. That's contrary to the regulations. I'm going to have to summon protection on you. Have you removed? Perhaps they'll transport you someplace you can receive some assistance. A residence for bewildered, elderly, aspiring legends. He elevated his device to his ear, a harsh mimicry of placing a call, his countenance contorted in a guise of complacent contentment. He had urged the elderly gentleman as far as he could, and now he was going to have him eliminated. He had triumphed, but his success was brief. A noise started to infuse the atmosphere, a noise so foreign to the gentle turf and subdued sorrow of the burial ground that it demanded immediate focus. It was a sharp, rhythmic tapping, tap, 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 the noise of intent, the noise of esteem, the noise of the old guard. From behind a line of ancient magnolia trees, a form appeared, proceeding with a stride that was less a stride and more a type of muted, disciplined announcement. A tomb guard sentinel in his spotless formal blues, his M14 rifle gripped in an impeccable port arms, progressed across the lawn. The sunlight, reflected off the buffed blade, off the shiny brim of his hat, off the decorations on his torso. He was the embodied representation of the burial ground's holy responsibility, and he was not solitary. Proceeding 2 steps behind him was the sergeant of the guard, and behind him 2 appointed officers from the 3rd Infantry Regiment. Their attendance was a surge of unadulterated focused power that swept over the occurrence. The whispering assembly became completely mute. The devices that had been documenting the display were dropped in a shared motion of reverence and veneration. The ambience altered instantly. This was no longer a communal disruption, it was a ritual. The youth's complacent look melted into a pool of bewilderment and dread. He dropped his device, his lips parting slightly. He believed the protection he had feigned to summon had come. But this was something different entirely. This was something he didn't grasp. Something well outside his domain of privileged ridicule. The sentinel did not glance at the youth. He did not survey the assembly. His gaze was fastened on one individual and one individual solely, Harlan Brooks. He persisted in his unyielding progress until he was exactly 3 steps ahead of the elderly gentleman. With a motion that was a haze of managed strength, he positioned his rifle to order arms, the smack of his palm on the butt resounding in the quiet. Then he performed an impeccable standard salute, his covered hand a stiff line from his forehead to the heavens. The snap of his heels uniting was like the snap of a hammer convening a holy assembly to session. The sentinel maintained the salute, his form as stiff and immobile as the stone gravestones encircling them. He then articulated, and his tone was not the dialogue manner of a law enforcer or a protection officer. It was the official resonant tone of history itself, a tone prepared to convey across consecrated territory without yelling. "Mr. Brooks," the sentinel announced, his terms distinct and keen. "It is an honor, sir." The youth gazed, his mind laboring to comprehend the occurrence. The sentinel was saluting the elderly gentleman. The officers were positioned at attention for the elderly gentleman. This wasn't an intercession. It was an act of deep deference. One of the elder officers, a complete colonel with silver locks and a torso filled with ribbons that narrated the tale of a lengthy and notable profession, advanced. He did not speak to the youth or Harlan. He spoke to the assembly, the mute observers. "Some of you may be pondering what you are observing," the colonel declared, his tone serene but potent. "Permit me to clarify. This territory is holy due to the males and females interred here, but it is also holy due to the surviving icons who proceed among us, who bear the recollection of their duty with serene honor." He hesitated and his stare rested on Harlan Brooks. "You are positioned in the company of First Sergeant Harlan Brooks, United States Army, retired on March 12, 1968, during an assault in the uplands of Vietnam. Then Sergeant Brooks revealed himself to fierce adversary gunfire to individually eliminate 3 adversary automatic weapon positions, permitting his ensnared unit to retreat to a protectable spot. Injured several times, he declined medical removal, arranging the protection, and managing aerial assistance for 6 consecutive hours until support came. For these deeds, he was granted the Medal of Honor. A shared inhalation passed through the assembly, the country's supreme recognition for bravery. The title on the blue badge, with the white stars on Harlan's collar, abruptly became evident. But the colonel was not completed. What the formal documentation does not indicate is that First Sergeant Brooks rejected a combat promotion on 3 distinct instances, opting to stay a non-commissioned officer to remain with his troops. Following his duty, he could have devoted his existence to the lecture tour, honored as a legend. Instead, he arrived here to Arlington. He functioned as the initial sergeant of the guard for the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in its contemporary period. The criteria of excellence, the principles of order, the steadfast commitment you observe in this sentinel before you. He motioned to the saluting trooper were created and documented by the individual you observe positioned right here. He is not merely a legend. He is our instructor. He is our criterion. The justification was complete, an overwhelming burden of fact that rested over the lawn. The assembly's looks had transitioned from grim interest to deep, untainted reverence. The lady who had placed the call, Colonel Hayes, sensed tears forming in her eyes. The youth, the arrogant, mocking opponent, appeared as if he had been bodily hit. His countenance was ashen, his boldness completely broken, substituted by a terrifying communal embarrassment. The colonel ultimately directed his stare, chilly and firm as rock, upon the lad. He advanced a gradual step toward him. He did not elevate his volume. He didn't require to. The subdued fervor of his terms was more penalizing than any yell. "You position on the reposed location of fighters," the colonel declared, his tone a subdued, perilous murmur. "And you deride a colossus. You introduce your insignificant conceit and your inexpensive doubt to a location that was compensated for in vitality and offering. You are a shame, not because you are youthful, but because you are uninformed, and you display that uninformed like a symbol of esteem." The lad recoiled as if he'd been struck. He started to falter. I didn't realize I was merely—" "You realized he was an elderly gentleman," the colonel interrupted him. "You realized he was a former soldier. You realized he was here to offer his regards. That should have been sufficient, but it wasn't." He directed a solitary stable digit at the poppy resting, abandoned on the turf. "Retrieve it." The directive was not a plea. The lad hurried to comply, his palms shaking as he struggled with the minor cloth blossom. He elevated it, his gaze shifting around, searching for an exit that didn't exist. "Now," the colonel declared, his tone steadfast, "position it back on the gravestone, and you will perform it with the esteem it merits." As the shamed lad moved ahead to position the poppy back on the cool stone, Harlan Brooks ultimately articulated again. His tone was not aimed at the lad, nor at the colonel. It was for the youthful sentinel who still maintained his salute, his gaze secured ahead. "At ease, trooper," Harlan declared softly. The sentinel promptly snapped his rifle to his side and positioned in an impeccable parade rest. Harlan provided him a minor, fatigued grin. Then he gazed at the title on the stone. "It's not concerning me," he declared, his tone conveying to everyone in the mute assembly. "None of this is. It's concerning him. It's concerning all of them." He extended a hand out, a motion that included the infinite rows of white gravestones. "Ensure they recall the titles on the stones. That's all that counts, the titles." His terms lingered in the atmosphere, a teaching in modesty and elegance presented at the exact instant of his own communal success. He then gazed downward at the aged metallic Zippo igniter, which he had ultimately removed from his compartment. He snapped it open, and even after all these years, a minor stable blaze flickered to existence. Another recollection, keen and touching, sliced through the current. He wasn't in Arlington anymore. He was in a field medical center, the atmosphere dense with the odor of cleanser and vitality. Patrick O'Brien was on a carrier, ashen and immobile, a wrapping concealing half his torso. Harlan had pressed the Zippo into his companion's palm. "You retain this," young Harlan had declared, his tone dense with a feeling he couldn't identify. "It's fortunate. I'll retrieve it from you when we're back home. You hear me? We'll have a beverage." Patrick had provided him a feeble grin and a thumbs up. It was the final occasion he ever observed him. The igniter had been returned to him afterward, along with a creased banner and an existence of remorse. It wasn't a memento of conflict. It was the burden of an unfulfilled commitment, a commitment to return a companion home. The consequences from the event were rapid but subdued, just as Harlan would have desired. The recording of the clash, the coming of the Sentinels, and the colonel's address became widespread, but the emphasis stayed on Harlan's serene honor and the esteem of the old guard. The lad's identity was never disclosed to the community. He wasn't detained or accused, but he was given an official entry prohibition from Arlington National Cemetery. More importantly, he was obligated to participate in a sequence of required instructional meetings with the burial grounds chronicler. He acquired knowledge about the legends interred there, about the significance of duty, and about the price of the liberty he had so nonchalantly assumed. Months elapsed. The period started to shift. One clear fall afternoon, a youthful individual was carefully cleansing a row of gravestones in a quiet, less frequented area of the burial ground. He labored with a concentration and a veneration that was entirely novel to him. He was a participant, component of a fresh initiative born from the event, directed at instructing local adolescents the value of esteem and commemoration. Across the lawn, he observed a known form, Harlan Brooks, positioned before the burial site of Patrick O'Brien. Just as he had previously, the youthful individual halted his labor. He didn't near. He didn't venture to disrupt. He merely positioned, removed the headgear he was donning, and held it over his chest. He positioned there for a considerable duration, a mute, respectful sentinel of his own creation. From across the span of green, Harlan Brooks concluded his visit. As he pivoted to depart, he observed the youthful individual. Their gazes connected for a short instant. There was no magnificent motion, no articulated terms of pardon. There didn't need to be. Harlan provided a gradual, nearly unnoticeable nod of recognition. The youthful individual nodded in return, a mute regret presented, and a subdued teaching comprehended. Then the aged trooper pivoted and proceeded away, his responsibility completed, permitting the quiet in the esteem of the location to rest once more over the titles on the stones. The most silent legends frequently bear the most substantial tales. If you were touched by Harlan Brooks's tale of honor and esteem, please approve this recording, distribute it to prompt others of the significance of esteem, and join BR Veteran Stories for more tales that merit to be told.